I swear, the only thing better than a ban list is a strong cup of coffee. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Cards and Coffee. I'm so glad you tuned in. Obviously, a new ban list just dropped, and a lot of people are really curious what the heck is going to happen to the meta. The last couple formats have been really diverse, so to see how this format's going to play out after a ban list, it's always very exciting. Last format had so many different decks in it, even though it was primarily dominated by Lyrilusk and Sword Soul. So many different decks made its way to top cuts at remote duels, YCSs, and even extravaganzas. Right off the bat, I'm not going to do some big crazy ban list reaction video or pull up the tier maker and organize every single archetype in the game in the tier ladder. And I'm not going to give you some tier 1, 2, 3, 4 and rogue deck lists, but what I will do is give you what I personally think is tier 1, tier 1.5, and then maybe the things in tier 2 that can compete in the meta. Everybody has their own definition on what rogue and tier 2 is, so to keep it simple, tier 1 to me is the decks that are going to primarily dominate the format. Tier 1.5 are the decks that are right on the cusp of being the dominant decks, and tier 2 are just the decks that can compete with the best decks, but probably aren't consistent enough or going to have enough representation to really make a showing like the best decks will. Now, if it's your first time here, thanks for tuning in. I really appreciate it. If by the end of this you learned something or maybe you just enjoyed the content, please subscribe to the channel. We're growing more and more every day, thanks to people like you. I'm super excited to dig into this, but first, as always, guys, please go grab yourself a cup of coffee or something. That way you guys can sit down and tune in. Thanks, guys. All right. So first things first, I think I want to go over the decks that I personally think are going to make up the majority of the top tables this format. Right off the bat, I'm going to go ahead and say it. I don't think Lyrilusk Tri-Brigade is going to make really any kind of showing at the top tables. There are some Tri-Brigade variants I think could be very successful this format, but as far as the birds go, I just don't see it happening this format. The first deck that I think really is going to be tier 1 this format, of course, a returnee from last format. Sword Soul is going to be a very great deck this format. Besides losing Protos and Pot of Desires, the deck functionally is the exact same. Now, yes, it doesn't have the turn skip button, which is very relevant, but at the end of the day, the deck still has the same tools. Whether you're playing the Tengies or even the DPE variant, this deck is going to make a very great showing this format because really it doesn't get hard countered by anything this format. Except for maybe Scythe, but we'll talk about that later. The second deck that I think is going to make up a good chunk of the top tables is another returnee from last format, Invoked Dogmatica Shaddoll. This deck really lost 2 cards from the main deck, 1 copy of Nadir and 1 copy of Fusion Destiny, and while it does affect the consistency of the deck, again, just like Sword Soul, it functionally still does the exact same thing. Winda is an amazing card, and it has been for several formats now. So any deck that can not only abuse Winda, but can consistently abuse DPE, obviously it's just going to be a top tier contender. Now, after the Alistair Dot deck, there is one more deck that I consider tier 1 this format. PK Adventure is going to be a very amazing deck. Not only is this deck really crazy at putting up multiple interruptions with the Scythe lock that plays through Droplet, but with the addition of the Adventure package, now you can play through Nibiru and any other hand trap that you're really trying to push through. This deck is really consistent because all you really need is to get 2 level 3s on the field, and it abuses basically all the best cards in the game right now. Scythe, DPE, and the new Adventure tokens are all some of the best engines in the game right now, and to have a deck that can just abuse all 3 of them obviously is a tier 1 contender. Now, one little disclaimer about this deck, you do have to run quite a bit of bricks in the main deck, so we'll figure that out when it comes to deck building, but just know this deck is definitely going to be running the top tables. The next decks I wanted to talk about could arguably be put in the tier 1 category, but I just felt it was so close that I'd rather just put them at tier 1.5 because in my eyes, there's just a couple things holding them back from truly dominating a format. The first deck I wanted to talk about at 1.5 is Brigade. Now, you aren't going to be playing Lyrilusc, but in my opinion, you could definitely play the DPE variant of it. Not only are you going to be playing DPE, but your Brigade lineup is going to be a lot thicker, and Revolt is a hell of a trap card, so I think if you build the deck correctly, tech it out with all the hand traps you need, this deck could really see a lot of success right now. After Brigade, there was another deck that was so close in my eyes to Tier 1, and that is a fan favorite deck, Sky Striker. Sky Striker is one of the most toolbox decks in the game right now, and it did lose a Fusion Destiny, but outside of that, it didn't lose anything else. Actually, you could argue the deck's even better now because not only is Imperial Order banned, the bane of that deck's existence, but its worst matchup in the bird matchup is non-existent. Simorgh is gone as well, so the protection from targeting is gone, which just lets this deck thrive even more. The only reason I didn't put Sky Striker at Tier 1 is the only thing that really is going to beat Sky Striker is it losing to itself. At the end of the day, if the deck doesn't draw engine to play, then sometimes you just lose because of it. Now, the last 1.5 deck that I really think is going to have a lot of representation right now is Trap Eldritch. Skill Drain at 3 is just going to be begging for the Eldritch players to return. The deck had seen a little success on and off last format, but really, now is the time for this deck to thrive. If you want to play the deck, you definitely have to consider the fact that everybody's going to be side decking for it now that Skill Drain's at 3, but again, Skill Drain's at 3, so that's pretty crazy. Eldritch is actually one of my favorite decks. I think the mechanic the deck revolves around is super cool, and the fact that it just got more tools to play with just makes the deck that much funner to play. Now, these last few decks, I really don't want to call Tier 2 because they're all really amazing decks, but at the end of the day, I just don't think they are at the level of these other decks. And then again, you could argue, really, they're better in some instances. Take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, but these decks also are very great, but I'm going to go ahead and put them in the Tier 2 category because, again, they're great, just not as great, I guess. The first deck I wanted to talk about is Virtual World. This deck is really, really good, but again, it suffers from the same problem it always has. Consistency is the bane of this deck's existence, and it just lost 2 Pot of Desires. It did gain a teleport, so I guess there's that. You can also throw Skill Drain in the deck to really slow your opponent down. That way you can get your deck going. But just know, I definitely think Virtual World is a very good contender this format. Again, 1.5 to wherever you want to land it. Another really crazy deck that gets support with the Grand Creators is Prank Kids. There's only one Meow, but the deck functionally still does the same thing it always has. The grind game's a little bit weaker, but now with the Grand Creator support in the adventure tokens, you can put up an Omni Negate and then go full Prank Kids combo without getting Nibiru'd or hand traps, and the deck already can play through hand traps anyway, so adding an Omni Negate on top of everything just makes that deck that much better. Again, this is another deck that I could see be in the 1.5 category, but I guess in time we'll see exactly where it lands. But my gut instinct says it's going to be really good, but it's just not going to be represented in the way you would think. Now, another amazing deck this format is going to be Dragon Link. It got more support with Destrudo coming off the list, which is pretty hilarious. But this really is the deck that won't die. It's the modern BA. It just won't go away. And while it can do some really crazy things, I just think a lot of the top tier contenders this format can do similar things, just a little bit better. Like I said earlier, there are so many different decks from last format that could really succeed this format as well. And those 9 decks are definitely the ones that I have my eyes on this format. But there are a couple honorable mentions that I thought I'd mention in the end. First being B-Trooper. You never know, this deck could get more support, and even without any support, the deck has been competing thanks to DPE. There's a lot of decks out there that basically do the same thing, maybe even arguably better, but I will admit B-Trooper is a very fun deck to play, especially since a lot of people don't understand how the deck works anyway, so you'll get a lot of free wins that way as well. And speaking of potential future support, Fluwandereeze is for sure getting new support next set, and while I don't know how I feel about it right now, after next set, this deck will definitely have to be respected. The deck gets even more consistent, and I am definitely looking forward to seeing how it fits into the format. But right now, just know this deck still can contend in today's meta prior to its new support. So that's it for my list, guys. If there's something that landed in a spot maybe you disagree with, or maybe there's a deck I missed, comment down below. Let me know what you think. Maybe you think one of the decks from the tier 2 slot really belong in tier 1. So comment down below and let me know. And again, if you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing it. The channel keeps growing faster and faster every day. Once again, thanks for tuning in, guys. I really appreciate it. Here's hoping to see you guys next episode. Peace.